Why am I here? I'm busy.
Sitting around doing background checks?
No. Doesn't that hurt?
Yeah, I don't know why the I just did that.
Furious arrived on Hulu in the summer of 2026 and immediately did something most serial killer dramas don't bother trying. It made you root for both women. Emmy Rossum plays Alice Black, a former NYPD detective turned FBI hotline operator pulled back into fieldwork when a rich man's murder connects to a case she thought was closed. Lola Pettigrew plays Catherine, the woman behind both deaths, methodical, patient, and nowhere close to finished. Creator Elizabeth Merriweather, better known for a decade of network comedy, builds a show where the investigation is almost secondary to the question underneath it. What does violence do to two women who've each survived it and chosen wildly different ways to carry it forward?
You haven't called the police because they'll ask you a question.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my house right now.
Okay.
Every great cat and mouse story eventually stops being about who catches who. It becomes about the moment the hunter starts recognizing themselves in the hunted, when the chase collapses the distance between two people who are supposed to be opposites. Furious builds this early and lets it curdle slowly. Alice isn't just closing in on Catherine, she's tracing the outline of a life running parallel to her own. That structural trick, two paths converging until they're nearly the same path, isn't unique to television. Some of its sharpest versions ask you to walk both sides yourself.
Heavy Rain, Quantic Dream's 2010 interactive thriller, splits its player character across 4 people hunting the origami killer, including, crucially, the killer's own eventual reveal being something the player has been circling without knowing it. You don't watch the investigation from a safe distance, you conduct it, fumble it, and in doing so understand exactly how thin the line is between the detective's desperation and the killer's compulsion. The game never lets you feel superior to either. That's the same maneuver Furious pulls off with Alice and Catherine. The show doesn't cut between cop and killer as two fixed poles, it lets their timelines bend toward each other, revealing that both women were shaped by nearly identical violence and simply metabolized it in opposite directions. Heavy Rain achieves this through mechanics. You physically inhabit multiple perspectives, so the eventual overlap feels earned rather than announced. Furious achieves it through pacing, slow walking the reveal of how close Alice has been to Catherine's world the entire time. Both works understand that the real tension isn't will they catch her, it's what happens when the distance closes.
Here's the harder question a show like this has to answer. Once you understand why she's doing it, does the killing stop being senseless? Furious doesn't let Catherine off the hook, but it refuses to treat her as a mystery to be solved and discarded. She has a logic. It's rigid, specific, and entirely her own. Peel back enough true crime mythology and horror movie shorthand, and you'll find very few portraits willing to sit that long inside a killer's own sense of justification.
Fuck you, man. Yeah, fuck you. You don't fucking know me.
Okay, great. That's great. See, now I'm so sorry I didn't hire you before.
Patty Jenkins' Monster from 2003 remains one of the most unflinching attempts at this. Charlize Theron's Eileen Wuornos isn't presented as a monster in the tabloid sense. She's presented as a woman whose violence grew directly out of a lifetime of being violated, and whose internal logic, however broken, is legible from the inside. The film never asks you to forgive her. It asks you to understand the shape of the reasoning. Catherine operates from the same place. Furious spends real time establishing that her victims aren't random, they're specific, chosen, connected to trauma she survived as a minor, and each kill functions as a piece of a larger, coherent plan rather than an outburst. Where Monster is interested in a woman spiraling, Furious is interested in a woman executing, patient, controlled, rarely losing composure even as the body count climbs. Both works share the same core discipline. They refuse to flatten a female killer into either pure victim or pure predator, and instead force the two readings to coexist uncomfortably in the same person. There's a version of the detective with a troubled past archetype that's become shorthand. A drink, a divorce, a haunted stare at the case file. Furious isn't interested in that shorthand. Alice's trauma isn't a backstory detail dropped in for texture. It actively shapes how she works cases, who she trusts, and what she does with her body when the day is over. The job doesn't distract her from what happened to her, it keeps walking her straight back into it.
Yeah, the second you walk out of here, I can't help you anymore. So if you got something you want to tell me, you better do it now. Because as soon as you leave the station, I'm going to start digging through your life. And I'm going to find out everything.
Mare of Easttown, HBO's 2021 miniseries, built its entire structure around this same refusal to separate the detective from her damage. Kate Winslet's Mare investigates a murder in her hometown while her own grief, a son's suicide, a fractured family, a town that's watched her fail in public, sits directly on top of the case, coloring every interrogation and every shortcut she takes. The show never treats her pain as backstory. It treats it as an active variable in how the case unfolds. Alice carries a comparable weight, though Furious takes it somewhere more physically explicit. Her past abuse manifests in behavior the show doesn't flinch from showing, rather than just referencing. Both women investigate through the exact wound they're trying to survive, which means every professional decision doubles as a personal one. Mare snaps at people who remind her of what she's lost. Alice pursues Catherine with an intensity that's inseparable from recognizing pieces of her own history in the case file. Neither show lets its lead detective clock out. The job and the wound are the same shift. It's worth sitting with who actually built this thing. Furious comes from Elizabeth Merriweather, the creator of New Girl, a decade of laugh track adjacent, warm-hearted comedy, pivoting hard into a show about trafficking, trauma, and calculated murder. That's not a small swerve. It's the kind of career left turn that changes how you read every choice on screen, because a comedy sensibility trained in character empathy doesn't just vanish, it goes somewhere. In Furious, it goes somewhere very dark.
How the fuck did you miss? I don't know how to shoot gun. Hey, you know this about yourself. Yet when I ask you to come to a party, you say okay.
Punk, there is a power dynamic here which prevents me from... Get down! What happened?
Barry did this first, and did it loudly. Bill Hader, fresh off 8 seasons of live sketch comedy, built a show about a hitman trying to become an actor, and the show's defining trick was refusing to separate the laughs from the violence. A scene could be genuinely funny, and then, without warning, someone would die, and the tonal whiplash was the entire point. Hader's comedy instincts didn't disappear when the show turned dark. They're the reason the darkness lands as hard as it does. Merriweather's pivot works on a quieter frequency, but the same instinct is doing the work underneath. New Girl was built on precise character empathy, knowing exactly what a person needs to say to reveal who they are in 6 seconds. Furious uses that same precision on trauma and violence instead of romantic misunderstandings, and the result is a show that understands its characters with a warmth you wouldn't expect from the premise. Barry proves a comedy background can sharpen violence into something more human. Furious proves the same instinct works just as well pointed at grief. By the midpoint, Furious stops letting you cleanly root for anyone. Alice bends rules and hides truths to keep chasing Catherine. Catherine's victims, one by one, turn out to be men who deserved scrutiny long before she ever found them. The show keeps daring you to decide who's actually delivering justice here, the badge or the woman working entirely outside the system. Very few stories are willing to leave that question genuinely open instead of resolving it for you.
Like a child, I picture opening her skull, unspooling her brain and sifting through it, trying to catch and pin down her thoughts.
Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, the 2012 novel, remains the sharpest modern blueprint for this kind of moral vertigo. Amy Dunn isn't a villain the book lets you dismiss. She's meticulous, articulate, and by the final pages, disturbingly persuasive about her own version of justice. Nick isn't innocent either. Flynn structures the entire book so that who's right stops being answerable, and the discomfort of that unresolved tension is the actual payload.
Furious builds toward the same kind of standoff. Catherine's targets are revealed layer by layer to be men whose power protected them from consequences, which makes her violence read less like chaos and more like the system finally catching up, just through the wrong hands. Alice, meanwhile, keeps making compromises in pursuit of the right thing that look less right the closer you look. Gone Girl proved a story doesn't need a clear moral center to hit hard. It needs two people who are each convinced they're the reasonable one. Furious runs that same experiment, with higher stakes and a body count.
Furious isn't really asking who the killer is. It's asking what happens to a person after violence gets done to them, and how differently two people can answer that question while ending up on the same collision course. That's the show underneath the show, and it's worth sitting with.